If your idea of poetry is something difficult, distant, or written only for academics, Simon Armitage's Book of Matches might completely change your mind. And I'm not saying that as a booktuber, I'm saying it as someone who generally didn't like poetry for most of my life until this book, sort of by accident, changed how I read it. Hi, I'm Dave and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm looking at one of the most important British poetry collections of the 1990s, Book of Matches by Simon Armitage, and this was first published by Faber and Faber in October 1993, when Armitage was still in his 20s. And before I go any further, if you've never picked up a poetry collection in your life, or the word poetry makes you think of school, exams, lines you had to analyse whether you like them or not, stay with me. This video is for you as much as it's for anyone who already loves poetry, because this is generally one of the best places to start. I actually first came across Armitage at school. A couple of his poems were on the GCSE English syllabus. Either year 10 or 11. I'm not 100% sure, but yeah, I remember it from that era. And if I'm honest, most poetry we studied back then, yeah, it went straight over my head. I was reading it to answer exam questions, not because I wanted to, but Armitage was different. His poems weren't about, the likes of castles, nightingales, or grand declarations of love. They were about tape measures, wallpaper, arguments, awkward silences, the small and glamorous stuff of actual life. And something about that it just stuck with me. It was the first time I understood that poetry didn't have to be big, dramatic things to be moving. It could find something beautiful in completely mundane. Whether that's a phone call, a car journey, a mother helping her son measure a house. That idea that the ordinary can quite hold enormous emotional weight has basically stayed with me ever since. And it's a big part of why I wanted to come back to this collection for the channel. So, who is he? Before becoming one of Britain's most known poets, and later the UK Poet Laureate in 2019, Armitage worked as a probation officer in West Yorkshire. He grew up in Marsden, which is near Huddersfield, and that northern working class background runs through everything he writes. His poems are full of ordinary people, which I absolutely love. You've got awkward conversations, humour, frustration, memory, marriage, parents, and growing older. He writes about everyday life without ever making it feel small or even boring. And it's certainly not that. And that's exactly why his work holds up for readers who normally avoid poetry altogether. There's no wall of academic language you have to climb over first. And yeah, here's the thing, a lot of people don't realise about poetry. You don't need a literature degree to feel it. You need to recognise an emotion when you see it. And Armitage writes emotions you already know. For example, leaving home, missing someone, being annoyed at your family, feeling broke, feeling stuck. If you've ever felt intimidated by poetry because you're worried you'll get it wrong, Book of Matches is close to the perfect antidote. Armitage isn't hiding meaning behind obscure references. He's talking to you, almost like you're in the room with him. You can read these poems once and feel something immediately, then read them again and notice how carefully they're actually built. Now, to me, that's rare, and it's exactly why this collection works so well as a first proper poetry book. The book is arranged into three distinct sections, and understanding that structure actually helps you appreciate what Armitage is doing. So the first section, which shows the book's title, Book of Matches, is a sequence of around 30 short sonnet-like poems. Armitage has described the idea behind them beautifully. Each one is designed to be read in roughly the time it takes to struck a match to be burned down. That's, in a nutshell, the whole concept. Quick, sharp, bursts of memory or feeling, like something glimpsed by a flame before the dark returns. Moving on to the second section, Becoming of Age, moves into poems drawing on other times and other lives, incidents and voices beyond the poet's own, but still tied to the same thread of ordinary human experience. And finally, the third section, Reading the Banns, is a more sustained, connected sequence of poems written around Armitage's own marriage, and arguably the most personal and vulnerable part of the book. That range from tiny sonnet flashes to a longer, more intimate sequence is part of why the collection still feels so rich more than 30 years on. The poem most readers connect with instantly is Mother, Any Distance. From that opening section, on the surface, it's about the poet and his mother measuring up a new house with a tape measure. But underneath that tape becomes a metaphor for the emotional distance opening up between a parent and a child as adulthood begins. The further he moves from her physically and basically figuratively, the more tension builds in the line between them until the poem reaches this quiet, I'd say breathless moment where he's essentially stepping off into the unknown of independence, caught somewhere between fear and freedom. Now, what makes it so powerful is how little Armitage forces it. He doesn't tell you how to feel. He lets an everyday domestic task, measuring a room, carry all of that emotional weight naturally. It's the beauty of the mundane thing again. Nothing here is dramatic on paper, and yet it's one of the most quietly devastating poems about growing up that I know. Then there's To Poverty, widely regarded as one of the angriest and most technically accomplished poems in the whole collection. It's Armitage addressing poverty almost like a person, a presence that's followed him and his family through life. It captures working class northern experience and frustration with inequality, but it never tips into being, how can I say, preachy or heavy-handed. It's sharp, controlled, and generally furious under the surface. Another highlight from the book, and that's from the first section, Not the Furniture Game, which takes the old party game. If he were a piece of furniture, what would he be? And twist it into something stranger and more unsettling than a simple list of comparisons. It's a good example of Armitage's playful side. He can be funny and a little surreal on the surface, while something darker sits underneath. And then there's The Lost Letter of the Late Judd Fry, which shows off Armitage's darker humour and storytelling instincts. His poems often feel cinematic. You can hear the voices, picture the rooms and streets. Even the emotional territory gets complicated. The imagery never floats off into abstraction. It stays grounded in real physical detail. Stylistically, Armitage is clever without ever sounding like he's showing off. That distinction matters because a lot of modern poetry can feel like it's performing for the reader rather than, talking to them. Armitage is far more interested in communication than performance. When the collection came out, critics praised its technical control, emotional honesty, and contemporary voice, and reviewers at the time reached for some generally glowing comparisons. Some even placed him alongside Philip Larkin as one of the most accessible, popular English poets of his generation. It's also become a fixture in school syllabuses in the UK, which is exactly how a lot of us first met Armitage in the first place. And, whether we appreciated it at the time or not. So the question is, why should you specifically pick this one up? Especially if poetry is not your thing. Because you don't need to decode every symbol or catch every technical device to connect with these poems. You just need to recognise the feelings, the likes of leaving home, family tension, marriage, memory, regret, humour, loneliness, getting older. It's all in there. Armitage proves that poetry doesn't need to sound grand or artificial to have some real depth. Sometimes the most powerful poems just sound like a real person talking. And once you notice that, poetry as a whole stops feeling so unreachable. For me, coming back to this book years after studying a couple of his poems around GCSE level, if I remember rightly, I appreciate it even more than I did back then. Back then it was just something to go through an exam. Now I read Mother Any Distance, and honestly, I thought I actually feel it, like that specific quiet ache of stepping away from home while it's still being tied to it. That's the mark of a poem during doing its job properly, and it's why I think this is one of the best possible entry points into poetry for someone who's never really connected with it before. So yeah, guys, that's Book of Matches by Simon Armitage. Still hitting just as hard more than 30 years ago after it was written. If you enjoy this and want more videos on the likes of historical fiction, modern classics, crime fiction, check out the rest of my channel and subscribe for more. As usual, guys, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. And as I always say, happy reading.